music, sweet and blue. What music makes me do the things I never should do.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Blu-Ray Boutique. I'm your co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And I'm your co-host, Rosalie Lewis.
And today we're going to be talking about some golden age of Hollywood musicals, those being Gold Diggers of 1933 and Flying Down to Rio, which were both made and released in 1933. And Rosalie, this was your choice for this episode. Why did you want to pick musicals in general and these specific films for the holiday season?
Well, when I think of the holiday season, at least in the Northern Hemisphere and specifically in Illinois, usually it's cold and a little bit, dark and dreary because the days are getting shorter. And so I always feel like I need a little bit of a pick-me-up during this time of year. So musicals are definitely good for that. And, they're usually very splashy and fun. And then the reason I picked these two in particular, I had seen Gold Diggers and I loved it. And I guess that's a spoiler for our discussion.
That's okay.
We'll get into why later. And then I had not seen Flying Down to Rio, but I knew that it was, I believe, the first pairing of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. So I've seen other movies of theirs, but not that one. I was excited to check that off my list. But, I think this year is actually turning out to be a good year to talk about musicals because so many musicals have come out either in theaters or on demand in 2021, which is fairly unusual. So you have, West Side Story remake, which has just come out. You've got Tick, Tick, Boom on Netflix. You had In the Heights this summer and Annette, which was, albeit a more avant-garde musical. So a lot of different, kind of things kind of percolating in 2021. And it seems like more people are interested in this form again. And so why not kind of go back to the golden age and see why it became popular and how the masters really did it, right? Because some of these musicals, you see the reports of, the box office wasn't very good or it's considered a failure because it's not really tracking with audiences. But clearly they were a big draw in their heyday. So I think it'll be kind of interesting to talk about that.
In the 30s, there's also a particular extravagance to them that I don't think, even in the 40s and 50s and stuff, obviously, there were big musicals in those decades and stuff, but they didn't quite get to the opulence of what there was in the 30s, which I think, I'm assuming was partially because of the Depression. People liked escaping into that. So there's a certain wonderfulness to 30s musicals that I love. So I do love that we're covering two of those today.
It seems like the modern musicals in movies are often either adaptations of a movie, adaptations of a play, or a remake of an older source material.
What?
I know, shocking.
Well, but
Intellectual property, what? So I'm curious, for you, do you find that musicals are more effective when they are completely original to the screen? Or does that not really factor in for you?
I don't think it really matters, but also, I would maybe slightly disagree that modern musicals are doing that more, because, if you look at old Hollywood, that I'm going through, I think I've told you privately that I'm doing all the best pictures and stuff. Just looking at all of those, you'd be hard-pressed to find most of those that are based on original screenplays. A lot of old Hollywood stuff, I saw somebody mention this the other day on Twitter, that a lot of, one film earlier from Busby Berkeley, that we're not talking about 42nd Street, that was based off a book that I think hardly anybody knows about anymore. So I think a lot of old Hollywood was still based off of other material.
Mm-hmm.
How later than this, you have My Fair Lady, which was based off of Pygmalion and stuff. So,
True.
but in terms of does it matter? Not really. Especially since, obviously musicals have, a lot of stuff in movies have roots in the theater, but I think musicals especially have roots in the theater. And as somebody else, again, on Twitter recently, I forget who it was, but they were talking about how people complain about remakes and stuff, but, some of those same people who complain about remakes would still go to the theater and see the 85th edition of Meet Me in St. Louis or something. So,
Right.
Musicals are put on again all the time on stage. So I think there are ways you can remake stuff, and it's fine. Again, it's just making sure you're not remaking something that is so well loved that you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot before it's even released. And two, just making sure if you're going to remake it, that you're putting some sort of fresh spin on it. Because if you're not, then there's really no point in it.
I think I agree with that. I mean, perfect example for me would be Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the movie was fantastic, and I know that there's a long history of that show on the stage, but to me anyway, I probably won't get to go and see that show necessarily be put on, at least not by the original cast or anything. So it makes it more accessible to people that, either can't afford or don't have the ability to go see a show on Broadway or, other famous stages, and it makes it available, but it also brings something innovative to those sequences that, you might see something from a different angle than if you were sitting in the theater auditorium. I'm just all for making things more accessible for people, which is why, I'm all for streaming, even though I personally do prefer to go see stuff in the theater when I can. I know that that's something that's not accessible for everyone. So this is just another way that you can see musicals that you might never get the chance to see otherwise. So I'm all for it.
Okay, let's dive into our first film, Gold Diggers of 1933, again from 1933. It stars a whole bunch of people. One of them is Ned Sparks, who plays Barney Hopkins, who is a Broadway producer who is trying to put on a show during the Depression, but for various reasons, the shows he keeps trying to develop keep losing their funding. And it starts with a big musical number featuring the always great Ginger Rogers. The musical number, We're in the Money.
Gone are my blues and gone are my tears. I've got good news to shout in your ears. The long-lost dollar has come back to the fold. With silver you can turn your dreams to gold. Oh, we're in the money. We're in the money. We've got a lot of what it takes to get along. We're in the money. The sky is sunny. Oh, man, depression, you are through. You done us wrong. Oh, we never see headline about red line today. And when we see the landlord, we can look that guy right in the eye.
After that number, that quickly gets shut down, and Ginger Rogers and the other leading ladies, Joan Blondell, Ruby Keeler, and I've hopefully have gotten to the point where I can pronounce her name correctly. Aileen McMahon.
I think it's Aileen.
Aileen McMahon are all out of work. They're all the actresses that were trying to get in the show. They'd be in the show, and now they're out of work. But Barney has come up with a new idea for a show.
That's what this show's about, the Depression. Men marching in the rain, donuts and collars. Men marching, jobs. And in the background, carols, spirits of the Depression. A blues song. No, not a blues song, but a wailing. And this gorgeous woman sing this song that'll tear their hearts out. The big parade of tears. That's it, work on it.
But he just needs the funding for it, and a piano song writer, Brad, played by Dick Powell, for some reason has the money to fund this new show, for reasons he will not disclose, and they put it on. But some people from Brad's past have come to talk to him about being involved in the theater, and eventually Brad does become involved in the show despite his initial hesitance to do so. And these people from his past, played by Warren Williams and Guy Keeby, don't like that he is on stage as an actor. And again, a musical number is directed by Busby Berkeley, the non-musical sequences directed by Mervyn LeRoy. And I remember this movie I saw for the first time. It was one of the few movies I got to see on Filmstruck before it sadly shut down not too long after that. And I got Filmstruck, and I finally sat down one night. I was like, okay, I want to watch something on here. And I looked forever, trying to time, what do I want to watch? And eventually I decided to pick, very late at night, probably too late to start something, I picked Gold Diggers in 1933. And pretty much as soon as, in that first musical number, We're in the Money, gets to the point where Ginger Rogers is doing the Pig Latin, I kind of fell in love with it and was kind of enraptured by it for the rest of the time.
Here way in hay, the honey may. Here way in hay, the honey may. Earwayin hay the honey may, the ice skates Ronnie say. Oh man, the dation pray, we are a woo, 3, 1, the say on rail. Way every day, say at the only, I bet Brian day, ooh, tay day. And we see the end, Lord Bullock lay the I gay, I pray and need the I.
What I think is great about it is that, I mean, there's many great things about it that I think for sure we'll get into, but being a kind of a comedy musical thing is obviously made during the Depression, not the height of the Depression, but still when things are pretty bad, and people really need an escape, and I think it's probably one of the ultimate escape films because there's a lot of great musical numbers by Busby Berkeley put throughout the film, which are fun and just big and huge and impressive. But also it's funny, and there's dramatic. I don't want to say dramatic, but there's conflicts in the movie, but never to the point where they get too high of a conflict. So it's never too stressful or anything like that. So the stakes are always in a way pretty light. So I think whether you would watch it during the Great Depression or you were to watch it now or a decade from now, I think it's a great movie. If you need to get away from your troubles, I think it's a great way to kind of do that. But what are your kind of initial kind of thoughts about the film?
Yeah, so when I first watched it, I would say it's probably about 7 years ago or so. And I didn't know too much about it, although I had heard, of course, of Busby Berkeley, and I knew that he was, a famous choreographer and had done a lot of these types of movies, so I was excited to watch this one. And I, like you, was just blown away by that opening number where We're in the Money. It's entertaining, but it's also really frank about, money, which is something that everybody was thinking about during the Depression, right? And then in the middle of that musical number, somebody comes in to basically repo the theater and say, we're closing the show down because you haven't paid your bills. So it gets real very quickly, but it's in this safe way where you can still laugh about it. And I have to think that during the Depression, that had to be refreshing, because if it had been too escapist and too, lavish, it would have also felt like a slap in the face to people who had been waiting in bread lines. But it's acknowledging it in a way that's not wallowing, but it's still saying, like, look, these people are having problems too, right? And so I really appreciated the frankness on the topic.
Yeah,
I mean, then you've got to love the characters. So we'll get to those in a minute, but that's my initial thought.
Yeah, I mean, Mervyn LeRoy, if people who know his films, was not one to like kind of pussyfoot around, I think, serious issues. And he can be very frank in his films, but deals with it well in this kind of light format. Like you said, they don't get too heavy into it. They have a nice little balance, because the movie ends with a rather serious musical number about the Depression, and the makers of the film did that intentionally because they wanted to, yes, while the things have turned out well for our characters by the end of the film, it's everything's all kind of happy endings and stuff, they knew people were still struggling, and they wanted to, like you say, kind of acknowledge that. And yeah, it's not like a depressing song, but it is kind of it's
solemn.
It's solemn, and describing kind of the forgotten man, which I think is the name of the song, and just acknowledging the sorrow that some of these people are in and stuff, and the problems they're still facing. And it's not even necessarily a call to action, but it's just acknowledging the struggle people are going through, which I think, and again, it's handled perfectly. And it isn't, because that could very easily have been a big tonal shift and just been kind of weird and preachy and stuff, but they handled it really, 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 really well.
Remember my forgotten man. You put a rifle in his hand. You set him far away. You shouted hip hooray. But look at him today. Remember my forgotten man.
Yeah, they do a great job of keeping a light touch up until basically that number. And by that time, we're so with the movie that it doesn't feel like a swerve into a different lane. It just feels like a natural way to end it, because we've seen this disconnect between the very wealthy and the less wealthy, right? The people that are really struggling day to day. I mean, when we meet the girls the ladies. They are literally stealing from their neighbors. They're stealing a thing of milk, right? A milk carton off of the stoop. So definitely not the best of times for them. And so I think it's important that the movie doesn't lose that as it goes along.
In terms of the characters, we can probably start with the women. I find it funny when I watched this film the first time and just thinking about it the many times I've watched it since, is that the most famous of the 4 women in the film is Ginger Rogers. But yet she is, oddly enough, probably not oddly enough, I don't know, I can't remember exactly where I think her star status was still building at this point, so it wasn't at its height or anything like that.
Right.
But you would, it's maybe surprising for people who have seen the Astair Rogers films and know how famous she is in film musicals, that she is given the least amount to do of the 4 women. I mean, she's really just a supporting character who pops in and out every now and then. But at the same time, is probably given the most famous song of the movie.
Right.
Right at the top. Yeah, so she still gets featured pretty well, and her character is still very memorable. Despite that, were you surprised at all when you watched this for the first time of this, maybe the size of Ginger Rogers' part?
I was expecting her to be more of a lead than she was, but then again, it kind of makes sense because I think she had done, some vaudeville and she'd been on Broadway and stuff, but I think that this was one of her first major films.
She had done 42nd Street earlier this year, also with Busby Berkeley, and that, I think, really helped her star power, but again, it wasn't really where it was going to get.
Yeah, and I mean, if she had only just made that in 1933, I don't know how long it took them to release various things, but if she was filming them at the same time or next to each other, she probably wouldn't have built up that same star quality just yet. That would probably happen after Flying Down to Rio when they paired up. But yeah, she's still fantastic in it though, and I was struck by not only her singing, which you mentioned the Pig Latin. I read that she actually was talking in Pig Latin backstage, and they decided to add a verse to the song in Pig Latin because they thought it was so endearing. So I'm glad that they did, because it makes that song very memorable and adorable. But even though she's not top billed, I do feel like in a lot of ways she's sort of the ringleader of the women. She's the one that knocks on their door. She doesn't live with the trio, but she comes and knocks on their door and tells them when there's a show that's going to be put on and they all have to go try out. She's kind of the one that kind of gets things going and is a source of movement. So she's still kind of building her brand even from that angle, I would say.
Still given, I think, a memorable part. Again, it's not a huge part, but she makes a lot of what she is given to do. And I think the filmmakers were starting to realize her potential star power and her talents and stuff. And so they were, again, they give her the intro number. So I think it is a nice highlight of some of the stuff that's great about Ginger Rogers, but again, she's not the lead, so I guess don't go into it expecting that. But we do have 3 other great leading ladies in Joan Blondell, Ruby Keeler, and Aileen McMahon. Did you have a favorite out of those 3? They're all quite different and serve kind of different purposes.
They are all different, but I have a hard time not falling in love with Trixie Lorraine. I just thought she was the most fun of the 3, and I love the name Trixie Lorraine. It definitely sounds like a drag name, and I hope somebody out there uses it if they haven't already. I thought Aileen McMahon was just fantastic in this role, and I think she gets to have a lot of fun in this role.
Probably my favorite of the 3 is probably Ruby Keeler, just because, I don't know, there's just something cute and appealing about her, and funny and entertaining and stuff. 42nd Street was the first time her and Dick Powell were paired together, I think. I don't remember how many films they did together pairing up like this. I know they did this one, 42nd Street, and I think Footlight Parade. But I love their pairing. They are absolutely adorable together. Anytime they're kind of paired together as romantic leads, I love kind of rooting for them and stuff. So yeah, for me, probably Ruby Keeler, partially just because of the romantic aspect of it.
Yeah, this is a very romantic movie. It's a sexy movie too, but it's first and foremost a romantic movie, and I love their romance. I love Dick Powell in this movie. I've seen him in a lot of different roles. I think the first one that really stood out to me was Christmas in July, the Preston Sturges film that he's in. But he's great in a lot of different kind of settings, including some film noir.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just, it really gives him a chance to shine and show his talents on the screen and as a leading man, and I really love those two together. They had a really believable chemistry.
Then you have Joe Blondell on the other side of that, which is she kind of has the more, what I would probably say is the more serious romance in the film that develops with Warren Williams' character. And if there's any kind of drama in the movie, it's when that relationship isn't quite working.
Now get out, will you please? Get out!
No, I will not get out.
You must!
No, I will not. Not until I've told you what I think of you.
Now don't you dare! Get out!
I was drunk the last time. I'm not now. I mean it. I love you.
I didn't mean to fall in love with you. I was only playing a game.
I didn't mean to fall in love with you either. I was trying to play a little game myself.
And I think out of the three, I'm not counting Ginger Rogers, the three kind of leading ladies we have, I think Joan Blondell was probably the best choice to carry that storyline. I think I think everybody is put in the four. Well, I think everybody in the film in general, but especially the four ladies in the film, are all kind of put in the best place for them. If you're gonna have somebody be kind of come in and out and do some musical numbers, then do some sarcastic comments, Ginger Rogers is great for that. If you're gonna have somebody kind of a schemer, sarcastic person, I think McMahon is great for that. Having a kind of innocent, lighthearted, cute little romance person is great for Ruby Keeler. And then Joan Blondell, who gets the dramatic song at the end, I think is great for the more dramatic, serious part of the movie.
And I think she does a spectacular job with her musical numbers as well. She's got a really luminous face that can carry a lot of emotion. And even when she's singing, it doesn't feel super stagey. Like, it feels like we're sensing a true emotion coming from her. And she's able to carry over a lot of that stuff on her face, which is a unique talent, right? Sometimes people are really good at singing and dancing, but not necessarily in a naturalistic way. I think Blondell definitely had that special something where she's able to do that. And she's been in a lot of other amazing productions, and I always think of her as being paired with James Cagney in my mind, because they've been in films together multiple times. So it felt wrong a little bit to see her with somebody else in this movie, but I thought that they did a good job.
Yeah, I mean, she is an actress who I'm quite ignorant about most of her career, so I don't know if she got the chance to do this, but if she didn't, I'd be maybe slightly annoyed if she didn't get to do some more high drama type stuff, because she, I think, did have the chops for that. I mean, she's great in kind of a comedy musical drama type thing, but I think a straight drama she could very much excel in, like you said, in a believable way that's not terribly showy, but is just kind of more subtle, down-to-earth human level. I think she really kind of excels at that in the little bits of you get to see of her doing that in this film.
Well, if you want to see a very timely Joan Blondell, you could see the original Nightmare Alley from 1947. She's in that.
Cool.
And perfect timing, because as we record, this weekend is when Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley comes out.
I'm debating. I don't know whether to... I've been debating for a long time whether to watch the remake or the original first. So at this point, it might be the remake first. So I might have to watch it after the del Toro one, but we'll see. I want to talk about Guy Keeby, who I think made a career of just playing these kind of, for the most part, kind of silly, I guess, older dudes who are just kind of... I mean, he's a great comic relief. I mean, the whole movie is pretty light, but I mean, he's still, I think, technically a comic relief, and he's great at that. He has a line at one point when Warren William and him are discussing what to do with Dick Powell's character. Guy Keeby gets on this topic of an old love he had.
I remember in my early youth, I trod the primrose path on the Great White Way. There I learned the bitter truth that all women of the theater were chiselers, parasites, or as we call them, gold diggers. I remember, well, one experience I had with a woman of the theater. It was the day of the big Harvard game. We all came down, a stout company of young blades, eager to learn about life. I met this girl at the stage door of the old casino. We went to Rector's for a bite. I had a cold bird in a bottle. She nibbled at a steak. Her name was Eunice. She called me Fuffy. I don't know why she did, but She called me Fuffy.
At one point, Warren William says, in referencing Ruby Keeler's character, because he knows that Dick Powell is interested in her.
I'm going to see her.
Oh, I don't know where she is now. That was 30 years ago.
Other person.
Yeah.
And it's a great little not back and forth, but little bits of line deliveries that I think Guy Kiebe does. He delivers perfectly, just the way you would want that to be done. And he has those throughout the film. Even when, because Trixie tries to basically seduce his character because she knows he has access to a lot of money. So their little relationship where she's doing all these cutesy little nicknames for her and stuff are just really funny and wonderful from both McMahon and from Kiebe.
Guy Kiebe was going to be the one that I highlighted too. And you mentioned nicknames. So let me take a moment, if you will indulge me, to share some of the character names that Guy Kiebe has played over the years. So we have, not necessarily in order, Scrap Iron Scratch, Finkelwald, Pop Greer, Hummel, Abner Dillon, Flaxer, Fanny, as he plays in this one, or Faneuil Peabody, Horace Hemingway, Uncle Newt Frink, Asa Plunkett, Washoe Smith, and apparently he played this character multiple times, Scattergood Baines. So that's just a small sampling. Oh, and later in his career, he played someone named Biscuits. So he definitely had a sense of humor about himself because he played a lot of characters that, just based on the names alone, definitely seemed like they were probably the butt of the joke. This was a pre-code musical, and
Yes.
it takes full advantage of that.
Yeah.
It's very, very
Naughty.
risque at times, and the first time you watch it, you might be surprised at how sexy it is and how many double entendres there are. And let's talk about Pettin' in the Park.
that is a number where you can very easily tell what they're talking about. And
it's not even double entendre. It's just straight up a body piece.
Yeah.
You're talking about people making out in the park and the guy trying to, convince the girl to let him get more intimate with her than perhaps she should. And there's very heavily implied nudity, albeit behind the screen and very artfully done. And
you see an outline of people, of naked women, essentially.
Exactly. So, definitely a very risque number, but also probably one of my favorites in the whole movie. It's a super fun one, and the lyrics are hilarious.
Every night a body should relax after all the wear and tear. Get that oxygen your body lacks. Get it in the open air. Go and find a little rendezvous underneath the starry skies. Take someone who's sweet along with you for a little exercise. Petting in the park,
Bad boy.
petting in the dark, bad girl. First you pet a little, let up a little, then you get a little kiss. Petting on the sly,
Oh, my.
act a little shy, oh why? Struggle just a little, then hug a little, cuddle up and whisper this.
So the one that stands out to me, besides the ones we've already mentioned, is the song with the violins that are kind of outlined in neon strips, so that at one point the lights go down and all you see are these white outlines in a circle of the violins, and then they form a giant violin just from, the choreography, and it looks so incredible. And that, I think, is a perfect example of something that's probably easier to pull off on film than it would be to get that same effect for people in the theater.
Yeah, you would normally, I know when they've done, I think the way I saw them get around this in something, in another musical, The Producers, where in that show, at one point where they're doing the Nazi number, people in a very kind of Busby Berkeley way, they form a swastika with their choreography and stuff. And I think on stage when I saw them do that, I think they used a mirror or something, or a raised platform, so you could kind of see the slanted platform, so you could kind of see what they were doing. But yes, much easier to do in film. But yeah, those types of things. Berkeley would do that a lot with a lot of making certain shapes and objects with people and stuff, and he would do a lot of kaleidoscope type stuff. It's just amazing to see this many people on a stage and stuff. I know we'll probably get into this a little bit later. I know that stuff kind of went out of fashion pretty quickly, actually, in the 30s even. But it's still just, I think, in a way, it's kind of to the point where it works again, I think. And it's just amazing to see, to the point where I wish I mean, you could see stuff like In the Heights or other movies where they do have casts of tons of dancers and singers doing stuff, but it's still not quite, for some reason, for me anyway. I don't know how you feel about it, but for me, even those movies they don't capture the impressiveness of some of these Berkeley numbers, and they don't seem to capture the scope of the number and just how many people they have involved in it.
Yeah, I would say the closest, and it's not a musical, but the closest emulation I've seen of that I thought was successful was in Hail Caesar, where they recreate some of the kind of Esther Williams style stuff, and the swimming underwater, that kind of choreography, and some of the other musical numbers in Hail Caesar. But I would say that movie overall isn't technically a musical, it just has some musical numbers in it, but I think those are pretty effective. Yeah. Other than that, though, you're right, like, it's hard to think of something that made full use of this many actors in a scene.
Yeah, it's weird because you probably have movies that have that many people, but it's just something Berkeley does that really it just captures the scope of it, unlike any other person. And again, it's great to see. I love seeing, like, a Gene Kelly just dance by himself, and that's great. But it's also great to see the antithesis of that, where you see, I don't even know how many hundreds or whatever of dancers and doing their thing. It's wonderful to see, especially in a movie that's shot as well as this one. Because speaking of that, the musical numbers are shot wonderfully, but the non-musical sequences are shot wonderfully too by Mervyn LeRoy. They don't just do. It's not like just the musicals are innovative and they do interesting camera angles and shots and stuff. The rest of the stuff is done. It does interesting stuff too. It's doing interesting stuff with the camera, and it's not just this kind of boring little static thing. Mervyn LeRoy keeps not the spectacle, but a visual interest going even when there isn't a song happening.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is probably owed to Saul Polito, who, was the cinematographer for this film and worked with LeRoy a lot, as well as Michael Curtiz. So he definitely had a lot of high-profile things he worked on, and I believe he also did 42nd Street that same year, so he, had some experience there. But, yeah, the visuals are phenomenal. Even if you turned it off and didn't have the music, I think you could still get something out of this just from the way it looks, because it is just a massive amount of human beings kind of crossing paths, and you could get lost. I've seen, I think, musicals that do kind of get lost because they don't know where to put the camera because there's so much happening, and so it's hard to focus, and your eyes can only look at really one thing at a time. But I think between Mervyn LeRoy and Saul Polito, they know just where to focus your attention in a way that's not going to overwhelm you, but you're still going to be able to take in the full spectacle.
Yeah, you never get overwhelmed with anything. Like you said, they do kind of balance it out pretty well. And I think that's partially because while the main actors are involved with the musical numbers, especially Petting in the Park, most of those numbers are not really focused on individuals. They're focused on groups of people, so it's less worrying about, where's Ruby Keeler in this huge mess of people. It's really just you're looking at the 50 dancers that are doing this one thing, and then you're looking at these other people who are walking down these stairs, or these soldiers that are marching and stuff. So you don't have to worry about finding someone in particular, because it's about the group and not the individual.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I think we see that less in movies now, but I think where we still see it sometimes is in the musical choreography you might see in either a music video or a live performance, like, say, at the Super Bowl, or if there's, an artist that's doing a performance at the Grammys, or, one
the
of
Olympics,
these
maybe.
Shows, right? Because you do tend to see those bigger spectacles happen in those settings, but it's more of the live show versus something that you would be seeing in a movie setting.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. We can get into in a second why Busby Berkeley's career kind of fizzled out, but I think it's interesting to see why that happens, especially even nowadays. I don't know if it's about the star system and stuff, where people want to empathize with a particular person or persons, so having a group of people isn't just as appealing to a certain extent even now, or what. But yeah, it'd be something, again, I would love to see more of. Again, I think there's a place for it. Not everything should be big and huge, but there is a place for big and huge if you don't overuse it.
So if you're thinking about this movie a week or two from now, and I know you mentioned you've seen it multiple times, so you probably have had this experience, what's the song you think is most likely to get stuck in your head?
Probably Pettin' in the Park, just because, well, one, they repeat that lyric a lot.
They do.
So probably that, and again, Ruby Keeler's "Oh My" is always, that's kind of imprinted on my brain. So that one is probably the one I'm going to hear in my head as soon as I wake up for like a week straight after I watch the movie.
I would say we're in the money. Maybe it's, just because it's the first song, but that refrain kind of has been running through my head ever since I watched this today. And I feel like I'm going to hear that song in my head every time Payday comes around.
Well, but on the other side of that, what would you say is the best number? Not the one necessarily that's the catchiest, but that you think is the best done.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to argue with Forgotten Man.
Yeah.
It really is. That's such a climactic scene, the way that it's staged, the lyrics, the solo from Etta Moten, I believe is her name, the person that originated Bess in Porgy and Bess. Just a gorgeous solo. And just seeing all those soldiers and those men in the bread line that, passing a cigarette back through the line, it's really powerful imagery. And even though I think of this movie more as like a fun romp, it ends on that more serious note, and I think that's a really effective place for it to end. So our next film, as we mentioned before, also came out in 1933, Flying Down to Rio, which was the very first on-screen pairing of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. Came out in December 29th of 1933. And this one was put out by RKO. And again, you have this amazing pairing of these two, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, but they're still not top billed.
No.
Right? There's still other people that are top billed over them. And the people who are would be Dolores Del Rio as Bellina de Resende and Gene Raymond as Roger Bond. And so the story here is basically there's this traveling band with a composer who happens to also be a pilot who flies his own plane to whatever gigs they have. And this composer has a tendency to get involved with the ladies, which often gets them into trouble and gets them thrown out of their gigs because he's mixing with the customers in ways that the hotel managers don't appreciate. And, he's in Miami and he sees this gorgeous woman, Dolores Del Rio, and who wouldn't want to go up and talk to her and dance with her and romance her? So he does. And once again, they get tossed out of the gig, perhaps because of that, but perhaps other reasons too. Not entirely clear. But they get another gig in Rio de Janeiro, and it just so happens that Dolores Del Rio's character, Bellina, also needs to go to Rio. So he kind of by hook and crook gets her to fly with him down there by telling her he has a friend with a plane. And then, in a Clark Kent Superman situation, just because he's wearing like the goggles doesn't get recognized when she first gets into the plane. So that's kind of fun. There's also a pseudo plane crash, not really crash, but landing on a tropical island that was unscheduled. And, that gets taken advantage of course. And he learns that Bellina is engaged, but she doesn't really want to marry the man she's engaged to, that it was an arranged marriage from when she was a kid. And really the two of them are clearly falling for each other. Well, they get to Rio and, things get even more complicated from there, right? So that's where I'll stop for now. Had you seen this movie before?
I had not. I had seen Gold Diggers a few times. I had not seen this one at all, so this was new to me.
The first thing I will say is I'm glad I watched this one first today and not Gold Diggers first, because the songs definitely are not anywhere in comparison to the ones in Gold Diggers. I still liked this movie a lot, but for me, the songs fell terribly, terribly short of the Gold Digger songs.
Yeah, the songs aren't as good, and you do have the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers problem where I don't know how you felt, but going into this, I mean, I think briefly that it was their first pairing and stuff. I was like, oh, okay, that's exciting. And I will say this was my first Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so I haven't seen Top Hat, I haven't seen any of that. Swing Time, I think they did that one too. I haven't seen any of their stuff, so this is my first one. And I guess it's appropriate since it was their first pairing together. But going into that, being excited about, the first Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers movie, let's finally get to see what was so special about that pairing and stuff. And you do get to see a little bit of that in the film. But Ginger Rogers is third build, and Fred Astaire, surprisingly, is fourth build. And they really, like some people have said, they really are just kind of comic relief side characters that pop in, which was surprising because I kept waiting for the movie to switch from focusing on Gene Raymond and Dolores Del Rio to Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. And I thought that would happen when they get stuck on the island. Like, okay, now we'll go focus on Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers for the rest of the film. But then they kept focusing on the other people. So, and eventually I figured out, I think I stopped the film at one point and looked up. It's like, oh, okay, they're not actually the leads of the movie. So that, it's disappointing, and it's a bit frustrating because nothing against Gene Raymond or Dolores Del Rio, but I'm much more interested in Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers than them and stuff.
Yeah, I will say, it definitely pulls focus, but it maybe was a good strategy because I think your point about wanting to see more of them is probably how audiences really did feel. And so leaving the audience wanting more of that pairing set them up perfectly for doing, a ton more films together where they are the leading couple. So there may have been some serendipity there. But I think overall I agree. I love Dolores Del Rio, but I kind of found Gene Raymond to be less compelling. And I actually found Raul Rulian, who we haven't talked about yet, but he's the fiance that she didn't want to marry, who's also friends with Rogers, so that's, complicated. But he is definitely more interesting and more compelling in my mind than Gene Raymond is. So just the leading man for me, he isn't as charismatic as I would like. But it sounds like I'm talking bad about this movie. I actually still really liked it. There's a lot of amazing dance sequences and a lot of really good, like, tango kind of music that I enjoyed. But there was this really long song, the karaoke song, that I felt like went on for 20 minutes. And I was waiting for it to be over.
Say, have you seen the karaoke? It's not a foxtrot or a polka. It has a little bit of new rhythm, a blue rhythm that's has a meter that is tricky, a bit of wicked, wacky, wicky. But when you dance it with a new love, there'll be true love in her eyes.
So that song I didn't love, but I liked the instrumental songs in this movie.
Yeah, when you had, and that sequence does you do get, I think, the only Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers dance number, so it's kind of in the middle of that. So for people who want to or going to the movie for that, that's where you're going to be looking for that. But yeah, the romance, just to talk about the romance, ignoring the fact that Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers are in the movie, the romance is a bit lacking. Like you said, I think Raul Rulian is a more interesting, his character is more interesting. He gets more of the pathos, he sacrifices more, and there's just a more emotional depth with him than the Roger Bond character, who is just kind of never really, he wants to get with Dolores Del Rio's character, but it's never terribly emotionally taxing on him. It's just kind of an old-fashioned, I need to get the girl.
We're seeing it as she's just one in a line of conquests he's probably had. In fact, at one point, there's a hilarious line from Ginger Rogers where Roger is missing. Roger, is, this guy who's known to be a womanizer. Roger's missing, and somebody remarks, like, that he's gone somewhere, and Ginger Rogers is like,
I'll bet he's broken both legs running after two women at the same time.
So that tells us about his character, and there's nothing wrong with being attracted to many people, but it made me less excited about his romance with Dolores, because to me it seemed like Raul actually really cares about her.
Yeah.
But, if she doesn't feel the same way about him, then I guess I'm glad that she pursued the man that she really loved.
Yeah, and there's also, I know I've mentioned this before, and hopefully I don't mention this every time we do a romantic movie, but but I've lost a lot of my patience with not just older movies, but newer movies that would do this too. But you see it particularly in movies now that are lazy and not very good, and you see it even in movies that are great in older films, where the movie might be great even, but the romantic pairing in it, for me, won't work because there's clearly not really much chemistry between the two romantic leads, and for me, it's very much the movies that the characters are in love because the script says they're in love, and not because you see any of that in their interactions with each other. I mean, he doesn't. I will give the movie credit for this. The movie, when they do that kind of emergency landing on the tropical island, quote unquote, at one point, Rogers tells Dolores Del Rio's character that he loves her, which on one hand I find annoying because it's like, you barely know her. How could you've interacted with her for?
Right,
I mean,
she says you don't even know my name.
yes, but I do like that. I do like that addition because it seems like maybe it's slightly recognizing the fact that they barely know each other.
Right.
Because he does it. I mean, at that point, he's interacted with her, he's danced with her, and I guess he's had a lengthy plane ride with her where you can bond and stuff. But we don't get to see that, and we don't get to see the bonding. So when he says he loves her, it just doesn't work for me because it's like I don't see that at all on the screen, and doesn't get fixed later on in the movie. Probably partially because of the reasons we said. He's not the character is not terribly emotionally interesting, so I don't really get invested in it. So it's a problem I've seen in multiple movies, and it's just, I don't know, it's something I've again lost my patience with, I suppose.
Yeah, understood. I guess for me it's like, I know I'm watching an older movie, and in older movies people tend to fall in love in about 5 minutes, so I'm used to it. It's par for the course, but I know what you're talking about, and especially if it's a pairing that doesn't have a ton of chemistry like this one, I get it. But I will say I did like that scene on the island. There's a sequence where, and I guess it could be seen as corny, but I actually kind of liked it, where there's like a second version of both Roger.
It's like the angel devil on the shoulder type thing, but done differently.
Yeah, but the way they do it is with, like using the double photography or whatever, of having both of them kind of interacting with each other, and one is telling the other, you love her, just, hide a part of the motor and take advantage of this. And her character's double is saying, you love him, even if you can't show it. And she's saying that she really does, but she has to keep up her, decorum, whatever. She has to be reserved, my womanly reserve, she talks about. So I did enjoy that little interaction. I thought it was kind of a fun way of showing them kind of fighting against their instincts, but ultimately giving in.
I will say something that for me really worked, probably actually my favorite thing in the movie, oddly enough, even though it's not really a big deal or anything, is they are on this island and stuff, and they spend the night together doing God knows what, and in the morning they get up and stuff, and then at one point Dolores Del Rio's character is surprised because she thinks she sees some black people on the island, and she thinks. And initially I was like, oh dear God, don't go there with this. They they don't say savages, but they say some, tribal people, natives or whatever. And I was like, oh, don't do it. Don't do that. So she gets afraid, and then Roger's asking, well, what's wrong and stuff. And then all of a sudden he gets hit in the head with something, and then he falls down. And she's like, well, what did you get hit in the head with? And he picks a golf ball up, and you see one of the black guys, he's kind of poking his head out. You can see he's not wearing a shirt and stuff, and then he comes out a little bit more, and he's wearing shorts, and has like the golf thing over his shoulder and stuff. And I thought that was a great sight gag, and was very much, I think, playing with the stereotypes of the time, especially with African Americans, and was genuinely, for me, just really funny and just unexpected. It was something I would almost expect to see in like a silent film from like Chaplin or Keaton or something, where you think you're seeing one thing, but then it's actually something else. And
that was a fun thing.
It's funny.
Sure. And I was nervous it was going to go in an uncomfortable direction too, but I was very happy that it didn't, and that it had that little twist. That was great. The other thing I thought was really funny, and again, a product of being made in the pre-code era, is on the island. There's a scene where Roger gets a little, I guess, fresher than Bellina is looking for, and she slaps him in the face, and then he just turns her over and spanks her, and I was like, wow, that's like a little risque for something made back then, but they're in the middle of a tropical island, so why not? But I thought that was kind of funny and unexpected.
Yeah.
But there's a few comments here and there too that indicate like that pre-code
era.
Like at one point, is it Ginger Rogers that makes the comment?
No, I think I know who you're talking about. It's not Ginger Rogers. I think it's one of the people who's watching when Roger and the other and Dolores Rios' character meet for the first time. They start dancing. He's obviously interested in her and stuff. The people in the audience of the concert that Roger's putting on, I think one of them says the line you're thinking of.
Yeah, so the line, the one of the women says, looking kind of jealously over there, is,
"What have these South Americans got below the equator that we haven't?"
It was like, wow, that's bold. They went there.
Yeah, I laughed. I really laughed. I was like, I wasn't entirely sure exactly if it was meant as a double entendre, but I was thinking, there's a strong
possibility. It was.
No, it was. It was meant as a double entendre because I was reading about it later and it was. But it was just, either way, it was just hilarious. Whether it was whether it would have been intentional or not, it was a very hilarious line to have in there. Some of the numbers in this, like you said, they're not nearly as impressive as the Gold Diggers are. Did Berkeley do? I think did he do this one too? I want to say he did.
He did not. So this one, the music, I believe, was by Vincent Youmans, and I'm not certain who the choreographer was. I'd have to look that up. But it's not Berkeley, which maybe is why it's not quite as outstanding. It doesn't have that same like visual panache. But it's funny because the number I complained about in terms of the song is one that I think the dancing is really cool. So it's that karaoke one. And first I thought they were saying karaoke, and I was like, wait, they're saying karaoke in this movie? I didn't think that was a thing back then. But no, it's karaoke, and it's this dance where, it's very kind of sexy, and like people are touching foreheads, and it's kind of a tango, but it's also got other things going on in it. And the Americans are seeing it performed for the first time and being like, oh, this is, kind of more than we thought we could handle. They thought it was just going to be some simple little thing, and then it's this kind of elaborate number. So the song that accompanies it isn't my favorite, but I love the dancing that happens around it.
Well, then you have probably the biggest number and probably the most Berkeley-esque number, which is the climax number of all the women on the plains. And that was... I mean, it's thrilling in certain senses, but it's also, especially since I'm afraid of heights, but it also, I don't know, it just feels like there's a lot of it that is just them kind of doing a little swaying and hand movements, but in ways that aren't as, especially if you've seen something like Gold Diggers or any Berkeley movie, is not nearly as impressive. So it's, I think, an interesting concept, but partially because of the restrictions of, obviously they wouldn't have been really high up in the air, but even doing wind machines and stuff, there's going to be certain restrictions. And in terms of the believability of the movie, you still can't get away with people doing elaborate dance moves on moving planes, hundreds of whatever feet in the air. So that number was disappointing to me. I think I could see why they wanted to do it and the appeal of it, but I don't think it quite works as well as maybe they were hoping it would.
I have to disagree with you on that one because I didn't know that was coming, and I was blown away. And I know I've looked it up afterwards, and they were, not actually moving. Like, the women were strapped to planes that were stationary, but they had the scenery behind them move, and that's fine. But it looks so cool to me. And I was just like, it was like seeing a Mission Impossible movie and seeing Tom Cruise do stunts seeing Tom Cruise do stunts, because to me, I am terrified of heights. There is no freaking way I would ever stand on a plane, moving or otherwise, even if it's 5 feet off the ground. So to me, it was very impressive. And the fact that they were even attempting to do dancing up there, I was like, whoa, you go, girl.
Well, I mean,
so I loved it.
Yeah.
I really thought it was outstanding.
Well, yeah, they do. I think a part of it that did work for me was at one point they do some kind of acrobatic type stuff where they toss one of the women and she misses the plane that she was supposed to get, or maybe they intended her to miss, I don't know. But then she lands on one of the other planes and stuff, and I think it's suggested to be fine. But that is like, holy hell.
Yeah, I gasped. I was like, oh my God.
She missed.
Yeah.
That was something I was thinking of before. It's like, what happens if one of them falls? You don't have a net or something.
Exactly.
But so that was, I mean, that's really in that sense, in that kind of Harold Lloyd stunt kind of sense. It's really kind of, that is thrilling. But I guess as a musical number, for me, it didn't quite work. But I guess I'm glad it worked for you. But I guess the thing we have been dancing around around is Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. So Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, they get one. Like I said, I think they just get one dance number together, And then Fred Astaire, I think it's some other dancing here and there to do, especially at one point when he's trying to train the women for this big show that they're trying to put on. How did you feel about their number that they got together?
Oh, I really liked it. I liked how it built up, and even though we've just seen all these other dancers doing this particular dance, seeing them kind of go out on stage and be center stage and interact kind of in the first time, because I have seen, some of their other movies together. It was really just cool to see them getting into their rhythm together. And I always am impressed by Ginger Rogers' ability to not step on that long dress she's wearing while she's dancing in heels, the turn backwards and in heels that she coined. I am just never going to be unimpressed by that. And then I think Fred Astaire has such a unique ability to look like he's about to fall down at almost every moment, and yet he never does. It's not as clear in that dance as the one where he's trying to deal with the new dancers that are going to go up on the planes. But in all of their sequences, I'm always like, how does he make his body lean like that but not actually fall? So I'm, again, just totally impressed by it. And I'm not a dancer. I have no rhythm whatsoever. So for me, all that stuff is all the more impressive to see.
Yeah, there's something very interesting about really good dancers. They can do these really kind of almost gravity-defying things where they just they're doing things that just don't seem possible with their bodies and just with gravity in general. And it's just amazing to see, whether it be Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly or lesser known dancers and stuff. It's really always a lot of fun. And then I think it's interesting, partially, that we're talking about this movie and Gold Diggers next to each other, because not only the fact that they're both 33 movies, not only the fact that they both have Ginger Rogers in them, but I've seen it talked about how, they're kind of again, there are big musical numbers in this. They're not all just Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire dancing, but they kind of, in a way, are kind of the opposite of Gold Diggers to a certain extent. At least the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers numbers are, where it is you are just focusing on a couple people, or just on Fred Astaire dancing or whatever. And I've seen it talked about how one reason why Berkeley his career did kind of fizzle out was because of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, where people started to get, where I think audiences started to gravitate more towards that type of dancing, and how you didn't have to have hundreds of dancers on stage to hold audiences' attention. You could do it just with Fred Astaire, even just have him dance, and that was enough. So, I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting to kind of see that, talk about both these films together with the big numbers, and then the two people that kind of, not entirely, but I'm sure were an element of Berkeley's musicals going out of favor.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I felt like, again, Ginger, the through line between both of these movies works equally well in kind of taking the lead and being able to do one of those really stagey, impressive things where the focus is all on her. But we saw her in an ensemble in the previous movie, and she was phenomenal in that too. So I wish both could coexist. I mean, I love both so much, and if you get the chance, definitely watch Top Hat. I would say is a priority, as well as Swing Time and Shall We Dance. I haven't seen all of their collaborations, but I highly recommend those, because it is really cool to see two people that you can recognize and see on screen and be like, oh, it's those people. I know these people, and you kind of get that kind of sense that you're connected to them in some way. But I don't know, those Busby Berkeley musicals, in my mind, they never go out of style because they're just so damn impressive.
No, I think the way I like to think of it is, especially now, in a way I guess maybe to relate to this, to what's happening now in film, is I've made the complaints with the current popular genre of superhero films, which I like and stuff. There's certainly issues with them and to what they're doing to the film industry, but I like it. But the issue I do find with them is, more often than not, is even with characters that are leaning more towards, it's in terms of action scenes, or more leaning towards one-on-one, one person fighting another in kind of a mano-a-mano practical fight, is too much. Now they go into big, huge CGI fests, and they're big, epic, and all that stuff, which are fine, but the problem is that's mostly all they're doing. So I think with musical numbers like this, with either film, both are fine, but you want to see mixtures of both. If you're just seeing the Busby Berkeley stuff, that's going to get kind of old after a while. If that's all you're seeing, it's like the line from The Incredibles of, if everyone's super, no one will be.
Sure.
If everything is big and grand, then nothing's really big and grand anymore. But at the same time, you get kind of bored if you're just seeing like a Fred Astaire dance. That can get kind of boring too after a while. So to see both, it's just it's not, variety is the spice of life type thing. So I think both are great. You just want to make sure you're balancing both of them out. So if they were to go back to more Berkeley huge numbers, that's fine. Where you're again focusing on groups, that's fine. And then you can also do stuff where you're focusing on individuals or individuals in the middle of groups and stuff. But I think what's great about the Fred Astaire or Ginger Rogers type of numbers.
Well, the one that I think I'll find myself going back to still over the years is still going to be Gold Diggers. But I think I will go back and review this movie, from time to time, just because it's fun to see Dolores Del Rio. I love the flying sequence, and I do love seeing that early Ginger and Fred before they really became Ginger and Fred, because sometimes Fred Astaire, and this might be controversial, sometimes Fred Astaire, in my opinion, is a little too, smug, and in this movie, he's just a guy, and I think that kind of works better than some of his other roles.
Gotcha. Gold Diggers will always be something I go to more. Flying Down to Rio is not something if I ever watch parts of it again, it will probably just be the Fred Astaire and Ginger moments, the Fred dancing or Fred and Ginger dancing or some of their comedic moments together. But the film as a whole, I really don't have much interest in going back to, unfortunately.
Well, I would say the main attraction besides Fred and Ginger is Dolores Del Rio, and one thing I definitely got out of this viewing is I need to see more of her work. I really want to go kind of do a deep dive on her, because she's really done, she had a very prolific filmography, and she, starred in as recently as in Coco. She had a little, she wasn't in it, right? But they acknowledged her in the Coco movie as one of the Mexican celebrities. So she's had a very interesting career. I don't know as much about her as I wish I did, but she was very enjoyable in the movie, and I'm excited to kind of take a deeper dive.
Yeah, and if you want to watch either of these films, I know Gold Diggers is Warner Archive, and I believe isn't Flying Down to Rio, is that Warner Archive as well?
Yes, I believe so, although I rented it on Amazon because I couldn't find a copy anywhere. I thought I was going to get it through the library, and for whatever reason, I guess other people must have wanted to watch it too, so I didn't get it in time to watch it on disc, but yes, I think it is available through Warner Archive. All right, so now we get to talk about the coming soon from our favorite specialty Blu-ray labels. And as we speak, Criterion has made their announcement for March titles that are coming out. There are a number of them that look great, but the two I'm most excited about are Le Cercle Rouge, which is a 4K version, I believe, and that is from Jean-Pierre Melville. They've released this movie before, but it was long out of print, and I did have a DVD. I do have the DVD of this. It's probably my favorite Melville. It's a really fascinating film noir with Alain Delon and Yves Montand, and really well worth seeing. Very influential, I would say, especially on the Coen brothers. So if you're a Coen brothers fan and a film noir fan, definitely check this one out. The other one is Love Jones. I have been beating the drum for Love Jones to come to Criterion for so long. So I am so excited that this amazing, beautiful, romantic, poetic movie that is set in Chicago, directed by Theodore Witcher, is finally going to be a part of the collection, and I can trade in my, I think it's one of those Snapcase DVDs for something that looks a lot more beautiful and worthy of this really lovely movie starring Lorenz Tate and Nia Long. And it's a fantastic movie. I don't think a lot of people necessarily have seen it. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it. There are a few that do, and those people are wonderful. They're my people. But this one is just, it's so gorgeous and romantic. And again, I cannot recommend it highly enough. So that's coming out in March from Criterion, and I will be purchasing that one the same day it comes out for sure.
From Flicker Alley, I don't think we've talked about this release yet. A release that's coming out on January 24th of 2022 is Repeat Performance, Return of the Lost Noir Classic.
Ooh.
Yes, probably right up your alley, Rosalie.
It is.
Yes. I don't know really much about this. I just discovered it recently, but just to read a little bit of the summary of the film from Flicker Alley, it says, Repeat Performance, the most requested film in the early years of the Film Noir Foundation's restoration campaign, is finally available in digital form. An amazingly original hybrid of film noir, supernatural fantasy, and backstage melodrama, the film stars Joan Leslie as Broadway actress who magically relives the previous year of her life, but can she alter the fateful mistakes and misjudgments that led to a New Year's Eve tragedy? Think of it as film noir's answer to It's Wonderful Life, or as a full-length precursor to The Twilight Zone. So, sounds very interesting, and I'm sure Rosalie will be getting that much sooner than I will.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. I'm definitely going to have to pick that one up. The other one they recently did, and I think I mentioned it before, was The Bitter Stems, which was an Argentinian film noir, and that one came out in November. So, two great film noirs. I'm sure as part of their Film Noir Foundation partnership, those restorations took place. So, I'm always a fan. Mm-hmm. Glad to hear you mention a noir.
Okay, so before we wrap up, just to give a heads up for what's coming over the next few months. In January, we're going to be talking about films from the Japanese filmmaker Ozu. There's a lot to choose from I think Criterion is primarily. I don't know if any of the other boutique labels have released any of his stuff, but Criterion has released tons of stuff. Like, I think a little over half of his films on a physical format. So we had a lot to choose from. Rosalie and I have settled on what we're probably going to do, especially if we like our first episode specifically on him, is that as we go through his filmography in whatever time frame we decide to do that in, we're just going to go probably in chronological order. So this first episode on specifically for him in January, we're going to focus on the earliest silent films that Criterion has released from him from the early 30s. And then February, again, we're hoping to do something for Black History Month, but that is contingent on finding a guest. Again, if we cannot do that, we will let you know what the change of subject is going to be. If that does happen, we'll probably let you know next month in January. And then in March, we're going to be talking about adult animated films. We haven't picked out specific films yet, but that is kind of the topic of discussion. But until next time, you can follow me on Twitter at CinemaPackRat, where you'll see links to my YouTube channel.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Rosalie Lewis, and you can also find my work on fthismovie.com, as well as the occasional podcast appearance. Probably the next one you'll hear after this episode is on the Cult Movies podcast hosted by Anthony King, where we talked about Pandora's Box. So that's coming out in January.
And then if you want to follow the podcast Twitter account, that is at Blu-Ray Boutique. And then our parent site has changed their Twitter account. We're getting more into they're doing some rebranding, which I'll mention probably next time. But their Twitter account now is at 25YL Media. And you can still find their main site at 25yearslatersite.com. But yeah, we look forward to seeing you next month, where we'll talk about some Japanese films. So see ya.
I hear music.